I'm really pleased to have with me up here two good friends and two people that I've really cherished getting to know over the last. Tom I've known for many, many, many years. Michele is someone that over the last 12 years, I guess, I've been involved with the Carnegie Foundation. I've gotten to know, and I have immense respect for both of them. They've been great leaders in their area. Michele Cahill is head of all national programs for the Carnegie Foundation, and she is one of the true leaders in the educational reform movement in the United States. And so I was very anxious to have her here. She also was brought up, I think she was trained at a parochial school, and she'll probably say a little bit about that herself. But we wanted to spend the first couple of minutes getting her reaction to some of the things that she has heard, and to inform the discussion a little bit from her perspective of hearing some of the things that we're doing and how it relates to the national education reform movement. And then she and Tom is, as you know, vice chairman of the National Leadership Roundtable and has been a founder with us from the beginning. He and I go way back, as we were both partners at Goldman Sachs at the same time, and you know, he worked for the government and the Treasury a number of years ago, and you know, he is one of the most committed Catholic leaders that I know, and it's a real honor to consider him a friend. But Michele, why don't we start off with you?
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thanks to everyone who's here. I not only went to 17 years of Catholic school, but I went to Catholic parochial school with someone who was sitting in this room and who I identified and asked if he had gone to St. Nicholas School in Jersey City. Scaring him, I think. But anyway, Father Him, very, very happy to see you after so many decades. Anyway, it's actually been it's a privilege, but it's been quite intriguing to be hearing your conversations today. And I want to situate them for just a couple of minutes before we actually respond to the recommendations that Tom and I are going to give some comments on, by situating this in the education reform world and what the current challenges are, and where I see, just one person's view, the Catholic schools and Catholic school systems maybe fit into this. First of all, as I think everyone is experiencing, the world is changing very, very rapidly, more rapidly for our country than has happened in decades. And education needs to change in more rapid ways than it ever has. The economy, the world economy now is globalized, and in the year 2000, a lot of labor economists were suggesting that we might get by 2018 to about 58–59% of jobs requiring some form of post-secondary education. It's 2011, and close to 2/3 of jobs require some form of post-secondary education now. Totally the reverse of the 1970s, a key point in Catholic education, when a third of jobs, it was actually 32%, but close to a third of jobs were open to high school dropouts. So the challenge for us is to bring, and I say us, and I'm including all educators, to bring a generation of young people in which far, far more of our young people reach levels of academic capacity and motivation and self-confidence and the level of effort to put in connected with academics that will enable them to make a decent living, but also, and from the perspective of I think everyone here and other educators, to contribute to a vibrant democracy, and a democracy that has to change in a very pluralistic country. The kinds of decisions everyone has to vote on often require scientific knowledge. Now, differently, we need educated citizenry. Okay, what does that mean for us? Well, it means for our society that we have to stop trying to get 30%, 35%, even 40% of our students through a kind of education which allows them to have deep academics along with problem-solving skills, collaboration skills, strong communications skills, the ability to take content and apply it in new situations and to want to continue to learn, something that many Catholic schools, particularly Catholic high schools, which from the perspective of a public educator tend to be more selective, but which they have a lot of knowledge about how to do, right? And this is a really critical thing. What it made me think about listening to people, particularly people talking about mission today, is that I think from my perspective, I'd suggest to you that you're at a point where the mission needs to be very thoroughly examined, and examined from a couple of perspectives, including this of the changing world. So assess and then create or restate what the value proposition is for Catholics and for the society of Catholic education. Here's what I mean. Traditionally, and if we look at the history of Catholic education and the experience of many of us who went through Catholic education, Catholic schools were very good at an immigrant population, a population that was moving from being working class to having a good portion of it become middle class in a society that was valuing education. Is that the key focus area now? 30% of children in America now are 24% of children in America are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. 30% of all of our poor children are immigrant children, okay, or in immigrant families, right? This is a really critical population in terms of education, but of education within these big structural changes that are occurring. And is the Catholic Church and then the Catholic education system of schools prepared to take that on, because it won't be the same job it was before, right? It is a tougher job, and it's a job in a very, very different financial context as well, in terms of even the labor available and the talent that can be purchased in the Catholic system. Another key point is to define what has been special and that is maybe particularly needed now, not in the delivery system of Catholic education, but also in the education reform conversation in the country. One of the largest challenges in education reform today is the education of adolescents. Okay? We still have over 1 million kids a year dropping out of school in New York City. Pardon me, not New York City, we have 1 million kids in New York City. I used to be a deputy chancellor. We have 1 million kids in the country. It's about 1.1 million dropping out. We've actually made some progress on that. It's been driven by some large urban districts like New York City. But we still have, and the largest group, the group with the highest dropout rate, which is also the most growing demographic, are Latinos. So many of whom are Catholic, right? So this notion of whether the Catholic school system or Catholic educators or the Catholic Church, and you decide where the answer is there, needs to grapple with that major American challenge. And on the challenging side, this is really going to be very hard to do. On the positive side, in addition to finding solutions and actually graduating every one of those valuable young people, is that you may have some solutions for the country on this. And we want to think about capturing those and leading with them, so that sometimes I hear the conversation about the future of Catholic schools, and it seems stuck in a vulnerability mode, or like it's a minor key playing underneath the music, and that there may be something to lead with that is stronger than some of the more general points. 3 levers of change that I thought of that I see in education reform in the country, and that I think would be useful for the Catholic schools to be engaged with. One been talked about in a couple of the groups that I was in, which is standards. What are we trying to get to, right? And that fits very much with the college prep, post-secondary education. But the conversation that I would want to suggest that you be in is the conversation nationally about the Common Core of standards and whether how that fits with where Catholic schools want to go to. And I say that for a couple of reasons, one of which is going to be tons of resources that are connected with it. And if it's overlapping 90%, you might want to think about, not being opposed to getting connected with that. The second is the talent strategy. And here, I think it's really a different financial problem, but a very similar one, and that there's a lot going on in the country that would be useful for Catholic and public school reformers to be engaged in about what are ways, new, creative, innovative ways of building pipelines of principals and teachers. And a number of those things came up today. But the third is, I think, the most important for deliberating. And it came out in a number of things, and I think we'll be talking about it. And it's what I sometimes call new designs for schools and classrooms, and sometimes called enabling innovation in the system. Cristo Rey has gotten enormous appeal way beyond the Catholic school world because it has a new innovative model that builds on that has been talked about here and celebrated here, but often talked about in terms of the financial model, which is understandable since it's practical. But the other dimension of it is it's a new way of taking the Catholic school approach and ethos of paying attention to both competencies and identity at the same time, the two tasks of adolescence, building competency and forming an identity, and linking it with the building of social capital for the kids, getting all those other adults where they're working invested in helping them make the transition from the identity that's pulling at them, maybe from the streets, or the identity that they have to leave behind in their family, to the new one. More things like that in which you're thinking about what are the value add to the country of this approach is really important. And finally, there's a broad and vibrant conversation going on in education reform around innovation. And numbers of little points that were that I heard today are about pieces of it, uses of technology, networks of schools for management design. All of this is going on. There are venture fairs that are taking place. There are new schools conferences, all sorts of things that have very little presence from Catholic schools. And that conversation would be a place where I think you could contribute, but also a place where I think you would learn a lot, build off of, and come to and enrich the conversation you're having about the future.
Good. That's a terrific start, Michele. Thank you. It's been fun. What Michele and I have done is we've taken the first two sets of recommendations and tried to select some to provoke a little bit. So this is clearly an early draft of what will be the final recommendations coming out of the conference. They're organized in 10 different sections, and which means, according to my watch, we have about 4 minutes a section. So we're just going to flash them up. One or both of us will make, and we'll alternate, but we may both make quick comments. Would then love to get from you all quick reactions, either underscoring, yeah, that's a great idea, or, gee, you really missed this idea. And then I'll keep the clock moving along. So if it seems like I'm being dictatorial, I am. And so with that, the first one is communications and PR.
Okay, so the first one is 3 recommendations. These are the recommendations that came out of your groups. National campaign. Central communication of the campaign should be the connection between academic excellence and faith formation. Second, there should be a clear objective of a national ad campaign, mobilizing public opinion to change public policy, understanding the various audiences and tailor the campaign to them. And third, there needs to be a tiger team of experts in advertising and marketing, individuals and the NCEA, universities partnering with schools, but with being driven by a new kind of expertise and energy.
I think to just summarize, this is really building and expanding on Frank's "the future is now" idea from yesterday afternoon. Comments, thoughts, suggestions? Christine?
The only thought I have is just that with the national campaign, it should be really directed towards states where there's a tipping point policy-wise. I mean, it doesn't need to be blanket. Like, there's particular areas in the country where tipping points are happening, and we should just, as we allocate resources and timing of applying that kind of thing, it should be done mindfully.
She's done using do you want to repeat what she said she's not using?
Oh, can everyone hear that, or should we repeat? Yeah, I think they could hear.
Good. Anybody else?
Back there?
Local situations.
I think that's exactly right, because the solutions are going to be local, at best at the state level, and even more micro than that.
Thank you. I think in our advocacy group, we talked about this, and I think we had a lot of expectations for the campaign, not only public policy, enrollment generation, perhaps teacher and administrator recruitment, resource development, some others that I'm blanking on right now. So we really saw it as a broad campaign that, where the messages, the taglines were appropriate, that a lot of good can come from it, rather than just public policy, which is certainly very important.
Yeah, and our group, and not to personalize it to our group, but we were talking about a national branding to get a bit at what Michele was talking about, to establish an understanding in a broad context of what Catholic education brings to America first, and then there are sub-targets that we want to go after, but being very mindful of not only the local, but being very tactical and strategic about those parts of the country where change can happen very quickly, and we can take advantage of that and to move, move the message.
And that's a good segue into number 2, which really overlaps a little bit, which is advocacy for Catholic schools. And the 2 suggestions: one, that the Bishops' Conference demonstrate its commitment to Catholic education by developing a plan and including Catholic education among its priorities. Personal reaction, developing a national plan doesn't strike me as right, because it isn't a national problem. It needs diocesan plans. But including Catholic education among its priorities at the Bishop Conference absolutely is needed, and would make a significant difference in my mind. The second, endorse the national marketing campaign for Catholic schools, showcasing student success and support advocacy at all levels, overlaps a little bit with the first section.
Comments, questions, remarks? Go ahead.
Just one quick comment. We shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't think.
Hello? Okay. We shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, Lilly Foundation did a big campaign. I was talking to Deb Estes. She had the Believe It campaign locally. There's some really interesting stuff that's happened. We should look at that along with,
Yeah. Is this on the advocacy, or is this on the national campaign?
on the campaign nationally.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about was having a resource to accumulate all the best practices that have occurred, and to develop a subgroup who are leaders in that group to form a committee, really to help inform the professionals that should be brought in to help us, develop that campaign.
And these topics overlap, because that'll come up in a couple minutes again. But
I was just going to say that too, Tom, that I just would suggest that it's important to not separate advocacy and the campaign for the exact reasons Michele was talking about, that we don't have a presence at sort of the cutting-edge innovative groups. And over time, even though there's much substance to going to those venture funds and various groups, we talked about it, I was on Jeff's team, there is a little bit of, if you don't show up, you don't get credit, right? And a lot of groups show up and they've got a great school and suddenly they're the buzz and they're in the New York Times the next day. So we've got to do it parallel, and that advocacy has to be seen local, regional, and national simultaneously.
Good. Well, the third topic is yours, Michele.
Okay. Central.
Am I cutting it off too fast?
Can I just make one little comment to that? I think also it goes back to the issue of whether it's a single campaign or differentiated for different jobs that the schools are doing. Central Clearinghouse, the Catholic Church.
We have one back.
George Haggerty, spent the first 10 years of my life in the advertising with the #1 agency. I think it's very important to have clear, measurable objectives, and in our group we talked about a lot of these ideas. But there are two things would happen. You move the needle on awareness and opinion about Catholic schools and the Catholic education. The more practical enrollment management, I think, is the key to success in measuring the success of any of these national ad and PR campaigns. They're very clear, measurable, and testing a lot in advance before you go national.
Good. Ed, I don't know if we'll say it as strongly as I know Michele and I believe it, but that data-driven measurement is really crucial, and that comes up in a couple different places. One of the great suggestions is creating a national database of just facts and information.
So that actually transitions or segues into the next one, which on here is called Central Clearinghouse, but Tom and I called it accountability and best practices, I think more. So it's a clearinghouse about what? And the Catholic Church in the U.S. needs a national plan. Diocese needs a comprehensive system level, but honest evaluation, baseline of information and data, acknowledging the strengths of Catholic schools, but recognize that that's differentiated across the country, and that need an assessment and standards of polity that merits a Catholic school brand. Substantially strengthen the NCEA to make it an institution of excellence. There was much conversation today about whether the Catholic school brand was articulated with clear enough standards, and also with really a sense of facing where resources needed to be put in relationship to achievement gaps and to different kinds of challenges that are present in the system. And it was on a system in the sets of schools around the country. But also how to get a real baseline of that and sort of see what continuous improvement would look like.
There's a phrase I love that says, what gets measured gets managed. Mm-hmm. And that's really what's needed throughout the Catholic school system. And that the public school system is well, I don't know if well ahead of, but certainly substantially ahead of.
Any comments?
On the NCEA, I don't know how many groups it came up in. It did come up in ours. I mean, we have a national organization that should serve as a clearinghouse as a lot of this, and that should serve as an advocate for a lot of the things that we're talking about, and should be an exemplar of best practices and high accomplishment. And we use the phrase substantially strengthen. I think I would say energize, or even stronger than that. And some in our group said, if they can't do it, create another one. But it's to have a group, but that has a good pulpit, but isn't using it as effectively as it could is disappointing.
Anybody else? Okay, demographic considerations. There's a recommendation that there should be clear outreach to Latinos about the value of Catholic education. ACE Consulting can provide the leadership roundtable with best practices, which can be disseminated across the country at the local level.
What was the statistic someone used? Half of the U.S. population under 20 is Latino, is that?
Latino population by 2050 should be half the country. We'll have some Latino connection. So yes, very strong youth.
Okay, bueno. The fifth is the leadership deficit, and 3 suggestions here. Providing resources or toolboxes available on a national level for superintendents to use in addressing problems that arise in school system. I think everybody in the room is convinced that there's solutions to many of these problems, and they may even be in the next school district, but the school district next door doesn't know about them. Second is pipelines of new leaders by partnering with Catholic universities to establish leadership training courses and programs. That recommendation will come up again. And third is an assessment of different models of boards and models of board training to develop the resources for establishing effective advisory boards. Some of the ideas that Richard gave this morning so effectively, I think that there was a common theme there of structuring the governance can make a big difference. Restructuring the governance.
The broader term board. Could we just strike the word advisory and use the broader term board, because there are many different types of boards. Advisory is just one of the many.
Where's it? Oh, here it is.
Yeah, good. All edits, everybody can mark them up and leave them, and we will appreciate all edits. It actually ends up being anybody who's been through one of these restructurings from a church ordered governance to a lay ordered governance, and there are a lot of gradations. It's actually very complicated to go through. I'm looking at Monk, if you were there when Notre Dame went through that, but having been through it in a high school, it's tricky.
Tom, are these recommendations to the Leadership Roundtable or to the church or to whom? For example, provide resources or toolboxes. Who is?
That's a great question. I sort of look at it as they are the recommendations of this group to the church as a whole. How they get implemented, whether the round table should be implementing or the round table should be looking to other people to implement it, I think I'm quite certain we haven't grappled with. But I would hope that the round table will take some of the best ones and actively promote them, which is different than executing them, but actively promote them. Jeff may have or Carrie may have a different.
I do have a comment, but why don't we get comments out here first and then come back to it?
Can we add?
No, Kathleen first, ladies first, even though you're a priest.
My comment was that to number 2, with Catholic universities, could we add Catholic colleges and universities and Catholic centers at non-Catholic colleges and universities? Mm-hmm. Pardon me for harping.
Was that your comment, Kathleen? Yes. Okay, was there one over here?
I just was going to address number 1. I appreciate where it says the toolbox is to address problems. It seems like just a negative perspective, and I was wondering if I could say a toolbox is for problem solving and best practices, something positive needs to go in that.
One other modifier to the number 2. There are some non-Catholic institutions that are doing great leadership programs that maybe would partner with us as part of an overall. Not that I wouldn't prefer to have it at our Catholic universities, but if they have low-hanging fruit right now, we might want to look into it. So could we be a little bit agnostic about where we're building the pipelines? Or no, is that really bad? Is that am I being sacrilegious?
One second. I think the phrasing of this, we weren't allowed to edit these, so it will be edited, or the ground rules, we took them as offered. But I think it understates a little bit. There are 18 different universities and colleges that are, at least 18 that are doing this right now, and we need to recognize that, but even more is what is needed. Sir?
With regard to number 3, I would add to that NCEA's boards department, because that may have already been done. There's a lot of research that has been done by the boards department at NCEA on the different models of boards, what has worked, what has not worked, and also there's a lot of training that is available, board workshops, webinars, and so forth, that is already in existence through NCEA's boards department.
Yeah, just on that point, maybe making a general point, my reaction to this so far, and I think it's been very good, is that, we've had, 15 or 20 minutes to consolidate many, many, many ideas. And I don't know if my particular group was hopefully indicative of the other 10 or 9 that were there. There were some very specific, very exciting ideas that are not being captured here, but will be captured in the ultimate reports and the way that we look at this. This is sort of synopsizing some of them, and we have to have an opportunity to prioritize them after we've done the homework on it. So that's point 1. The second point is, in terms of, I'll be curious to see in the report of the conversations of the suggestions as to which organizations may be the best to actually be involved in executing this. We've been challenged by a number of you, BJ and others, for the National Leadership Roundtable to take on some of these. That's something we're going to deal with the board. Now, the thing, whether we're the right ones or there are organizations that are represented in the room or around the country who are doing already a lot of work in these areas, know all the players, know how to do it, and they should be the leader of that. But we can provide a forum for that group to work to take on the execution of this is part of the actual business plan that has to be developed subsequent to this. The thing that we will commit, we want to commit, basically, is in bringing you all together, because I have found really has been an absolute delight to hear the level of ideas, creativity, excitement, motivation, and there's a lot of good stuff going on, and the last thing that we want to do is duplicate effort. What we want to do is find those best practices, get those creative minds working together, but then assign responsibility for either an organization or a couple of organizations to take on, how do we actualize some of these good ideas? How much is that going to cost? Where we're going to get the money? Who's going to be responsible? And that is going to be part of the report that not only the report, but the action plan that we're going to present to you all for your comment and hopefully support. And to the extent that whether it's the National Leadership Roundtable or subgroups of us who have identified areas of interest, we're going to turn it back to you to ask for additional involvement by you to help with the execution portion of this.
Tony Clemmer from Rhode Island. I think it's appropriate. We're on the slide that says leadership deficit for this comment, I think anyway. One of the themes that came up several times in our group, and we're pointing this at school leaders, I think, but in my mind, and maybe you're the third leg of the stool, you, the leadership roundtable, or this group, but without a clear commitment from the Catholic colleges and universities, 1, and 2, from the bishops, I don't see how we even move forward sort of 1 inch as an organized movement representing the real interest of the church. And so to me, I think it needs to be strongly stated that that leadership needs to lead this effort, and we can follow it with all of these various best practices that are peppered around the country. But I think it can't be overstated or understated that those 2 stakeholders, and maybe you're the third that can help drive that, really are going to get this done. And without all 3, or at least those 2, I don't see a lot happening.
Could I make one comment on it as well? Because I've spent quite a lot of time. I designed the Leadership Academy for the New York City reform, and then fund new leaders for new schools with Carnegie. You might have something in here about challenging the higher ed and the schools to come together on some innovation designs that are challenge to the new vision of where you're going with the fewer, clearer, higher standards, but also with some things we've learned from development and training from other kinds of organizations, corporations, others, so that's happening out there in school reform. There are numbers of new models that are very different partnerships that have flipped the training from pre to in and then come back again. So there's just, I think, driving innovation in all of these and finding ways of incentivizing that, maybe competitively among the colleges or whatever. Okay. All right, role of Catholic higher education.
Actually, that's a good segue into number 6.
Is that you or me? I'm sorry.
No,
It was
you,
me.
you
Okay,
can.
yeah. We call upon Catholic universities to take a fresh look at the resources and services that they can offer in the formation of Catholic school administrators and teachers. We were just talking about that. Encourage the replication of ACE-like programs of teacher formation in all Catholic universities. That the Catholic grade schools and high schools learn from the success pattern of Catholic higher education and some Catholic secondary schools in ownership and governance models. Comments?
Right, I think one of the challenges of putting together a report is going to be how overlappy.
Right.
I mean, all three of these ideas have already. All three of these ideas are very important ideas, but they've all come up previously, so we need to remove the repetition.
Yeah,
Sure.
but let me just challenge on the last one. There's deep conversations and a lot of experimentation going on around the country in the linking of what graduates of K-12 come out knowing, being able to do, and personal characteristics, and what's required for college readiness. And in the country as a whole, we have a big gap on that, right? We're a country that has a lot of access to higher education. That's 6% of our population is in higher education. In the UK and France, it's about 3%. They have an access problem. We don't have so much of an access problem. We have a problem of completion. And that's a generalization. We still have, only 20% of the lowest fifth get to go to higher ed. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is the connection both ways, arrows going both ways, and the capacity of Catholic higher education to be very explicit about what competencies and attributes are needed for success in the first year of college. And you can get really concrete about that, like the barrier course is math for most students who don't finish first year. So there's a range of things that could happen like that. And to just add a little innovation dimension, in New York City, we started something with CUNY, the City University of New York, called College Now, in which every year about 16,000 high school students are taking at least one college course. Right? Catholic schools could be doing that and getting and many are, but making sure that their students have this bump transition to college by seeing exactly what's going to be expected of them in that time. Okay, go ahead.
Innovation and strategic alliances. Create an innovation in Catholic schools think tank that would promote, support, publish best models that have already been operationalized, help find funds to accelerate innovation, and establishing a recurring competition to emphasize and encourage innovation. As the next one says, create a Catholic race to the top. And specifically, the first thinks about an organization to showcase innovative ideas. The second one, a fund to actually invest in and incubate those kinds of ideas. And third is utilize online and blended learning technology. We in our group spent a lot of time on the fact that as technology gets more able to personalize education and to deliver different education to different populations and different needs, whether it's sociological and so dealing with different races and different language skills, or whether it's geographic and dealing with the difference between urban and rural schools, technology is going to be able to enable us to deliver a much better product relatively quickly. And that's what's meant by the utilization of learning technology.
This is a lot of groups working and communicating around the country on that. The Catholic schools have a disadvantage in needing money, but an advantage over public K-12 in this regard. I've been to numbers of venture conversations with people who have some very good products. And if anyone cares about equity, it's a very depressing conversation. Everyone here cares about equity, but when you're there and you care about equity, it's a very depressing conversation because the companies will essentially say that they're creating their materials for higher ed, but also for the creative classes. That is, the parents who are worried about what I started talking about first, that their kids won't compete globally, so they'll purchase anything, and they can't get into K-12 because of the bureaucracy. You don't have that bureaucracy. You may need the money, but you have opportunities for experimenting. Okay. Models of financial sustainability, certainly core to the whole day's conversation. 1, develop a standards for excellence guide for schools. 2, create or find a national organization to foster an alumni participation organization, provide a clearinghouse that identifies and promulgates available sources of support, promulgates best practices and ways to use the alternative sources of funding, I think that means public funding, and organize to get vouchers, parental choice.
I think these are two of the most powerful ideas of these 2 days. The standards of excellence, which everybody in the roundtable is familiar with and has been so successful in the non-for-profit sector, if it can be organized to create models of organization and behavior in the school system, can be a very, very powerful tool that will apply to every Catholic school in the country. And on number 3, organize to get vouchers is a pale summary of BJ's excellent presentation of the importance and the leverage and what we heard from Christine yesterday on trying to make things like the Opportunity Scholarship Act work in order to create financial stability.
So it includes tax credits. It's a generic for all of those areas.
Yes, at least I would assume that.
Right.
Please, in the... Well, and what it potentially can do is to explore the ideas of governance that we've talked about today and yesterday in an organized and disciplined way.
The standards already, the drafts we've got already support all of the things that have been said in that regard. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm finished now. It already supports everything. I mean, it supports the movement to new governance structures.
Right.
Please.
Just regarding number 3, most of the conversation we've had about vouchers and tax credits and so on have focused on the states. And I think I'd like to raise up that I've reason to believe that there's a new moment of opportunity and openness in the Obama administration for this kind of conversation. Now, I don't know what format that would take, but if there can be tax credits in the state, can there be federal tax credits? So that something explicit should be said about an overture to the Obama administration, especially as it faces into another election round, and the Catholic vote that is so significant, especially in the swing states for whoever wins the next election. I think there could be a moment of opportunity for a new level of conversation with the Obama administration.
I just want to piggyback on Lorraine's thought on the standards of excellence. And sometimes for us in the K-12, that the research that takes place in colleges and universities takes a long time to get into practice. So the universities and the colleges can really help us in developing quicker, and I think we need to do it quicker, these innovations and strategic management that will help us get these innovations into the K-12 arena in a timely way.
Next is public-private charter models. Set up a structure and funding for advocacy that is proactive, more aggressive than in the past, works at the national and state levels, and is in careful partnerships with other faiths, the charter school movement, and public schools for parental choice in education. Hire a big-time lobbyist. That's what you said.
I'd be remiss if I didn't make the same speech to you all that I make everywhere else about big-time lobbyists. Totally overrated, totally unnecessary. We have the best lobbyists in this room, the actual representatives of the work being done, and those are the people we just have to use in one of these organizational structures that we create. I just want to say that to folks who sometimes feel like politics is a foreign animal, and you think in order to be political you need to hire lobbyists. Patty Whitesell O'Neill can tell you, it doesn't happen. It's usually the people on the ground who can make it happen. They just need to be coordinated.
I would just say that you would expand beyond partnerships with other faiths. And we found out, like working with Latino Alliance and the Black Ministers Council, hugely powerful in New Jersey. So it's beyond just faiths, really. So groups. It should be groups.
I'm not sure just where to insert this comment, but I think this maybe is the best place. I'm Jeff Von Arx from Fairfield University. But as somebody who's responsible for a Catholic private prep school as well as a university, just kind of raising the question, how much of what we have been talking about is relevant to impacts, engages Catholic private education, and does that need a slightly different slant? Is there an outreach to be made there as well, or do we just assume that everything that we've been saying over the course of the last day and a half is going to apply to the fairly substantial and really very successful sector of Catholic private education? So just a kind of question to ponder.
Jeff, in response, like Fairfield Prep, did the schools like that have issues of financial sustainability, or do they have financial models that work better than do parochial schools and diocesan high schools?
I certainly wouldn't presume to speak for all of them, but many of them are doing quite well indeed. Thank you very much.
Right, and I think that, to me, that would be one of the differences. I think clearly there's a theme across all of this, right, of financial stability.
Yep.
Sustainability.
But I think learning from those groups in terms of what has worked well for them is they're part of the, I mean, we're all part of the same family. So, you know.
All I'm suggesting is deliberate engagement.
Well, and they may be great sources of educational best practice, having resources not available in many diocesan activities.
Bill McCursey of the Archdiocese of Boston, we're blessed with a number of those schools, and what we've been able the last several years is begin to bring them into the conversation. And some of them, even the best, are struggling a little more than we know, but even those who aren't, with the right approach, they see the mission here and the purpose. Even when many of them now, for example, St. John's Prep, well known in Danvers, only 18% of its enrolling student body come from Catholic schools. But still, they are there front and center to say, we care about the mission and we want to be there for you, and they have lots of expertise and lots of resource. So I think we should be explicit here, and maybe it's back related to the higher ed level, for those strong secondary Catholic schools to be a resource to us.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that, I know in my own high school that I went to, Chaminade High School, they not only have the school that I went to, but they are now working with some of the other high schools that haven't performed as well, and they also have taken on some of the grammar schools, and the application of their style of management and leadership and has been phenomenally successful. So to be honest with you, the way that I thought about it is when we talk about higher ed, I sort of include the secondary. Maybe we should be explicit about it, but I think that it's an enormous resource that we should be tapping into.
Can I just say an education point on that? And I think it applies to a number of Catholic. I'm mainly familiar with Catholic inner city schools and then prep schools. It's the same point about articulation across an entire pre-K through 16 system. That is, if you got extremely concrete, to succeed in a school like Fairfield Prep, you need to be able to write at the point that you come into 9th grade using evidence, right? Many of our public schools and many of our Catholic parochial schools don't emphasize writing enough, and when they do, you're reading stories and you write a story about your experience. It's not at the level, which is where the Common Core is going as well, where you read and you look for evidence when you're in 5th grade. Now, that's extremely concrete, but it's something the Catholic schools that are doing well and are in high school could be promoting down, and then down in the grades. But in the grades, then getting resources to help teachers learn to do that. This is not a simple thing to do with kids who are coming in when they're in, if they're poor, with 5,000 fewer words than advantaged kids when they're 5 years old, right? So but it's making the challenge very concrete by linking the system from college through K and K up through college, and then getting the right priority problems solved at different levels.
Let's go on to the final, which is rural, urban, and suburban schools. And the suggestion here is focusing on ownership, governance, and management models to share authority, and especially through the incorporation of lay leadership. And I would add, as I had a couple minutes ago, I think the use of technology will increase the flexibility of dealing with different kinds of schools in different kinds of situations. Okay, well, if no one has, we're into number 11.
Well, Father Mona.
Oh, good. Well, maybe you'll take us to number 11.
I didn't know there was an 11.
Yeah,
but
no. Do we have an 11?
It's other.
I wanted to make a comment that is somewhat of a background comment for all that we've been doing, because so much has been said about the colleges and universities. And clearly, I think the colleges and universities have done a tremendous amount in assisting the elementary and high schools, and can do more, will do more. On the other hand, there are things that we probably can't do. Colleges and universities also have severe limits. A lot of your smaller ones have enormous challenges to stay afloat themselves. Some of your larger ones are much more capable of doing that. But in addition to the challenges they face themselves, there is a significant difference between the nature and the capabilities of grammar schools and high schools and colleges and universities. They even occupy a different status. And their treatment, for example, of faith will be different. You can do things with regard to the faith in the way you treat it at a grammar school that you can't do necessarily at the college and university level. For example, I'm not in that brilliant explanation of the steps that every institution should take that Richard Burke gave this morning. I'm not sure everyone is aware that most colleges, Catholic colleges and universities in the decade of the 60s and 70s moved their ownership completely from the church and the religious orders and moved the governance from the church and the religious orders, so that at this point they consider themselves radically independent institutions. from a jurisdictional point of view, they're not Catholic institutions exactly. So that the limits that they have are very real. And consequently, there, as I say, there's much the colleges and universities have done. There's much more they can do, will do, but there are also limits that we are going to have to explore. We haven't had to explore all the limits that we do have, but as we attempt to do much more, there's going to have to be a greater exploration of, and a fuller exploration of what the limits are as well of what's possible.
Great.
John Fontana from Woodstock. Jeff, I wanted to follow up off of your comments. At Woodstock, we paid a lot of attention to values, and I was really thrilled to hear the type of positive value orientation that, that the roundtable has. And as I was listening to the different responses, one of the dangers is always splitting. When groups go either or, private, public, we've got to be very careful in terms of dealing with that. I noticed like the NCAA, when we talked about the NCAA, it sounded more critical than positive. So our ability to kind of engage along those lines, particularly in terms of building coalitions, I think would be a real important value and benefit to sustain.
Right. I'd like to conclude, because we're a couple minutes over and Carrie is going to bring us to a complete end. I want to conclude with something that may surprise you all a little bit, but it's one sentence from Joel Klein in an article that he wrote recently in the Atlantic, and you'll see that he learned a lot from Michele, because it's going to echo just what she started us with. But why I read it is because I'm struck by the similarity of the problems in the New York City public system and what we face in the Catholic system. But Joel wrote, we still won't get where we need to go unless we're prepared to do three difficult things, three essential things. One, rebuild our entire K-12 system on a platform of accountability. Two, attract more top-flight recruits into teaching. And three, use technology very differently to improve instruction. And I think we all need that in our Catholic school system identically.
Carrie, you want me to say something and then you do? Well, thank you all on behalf of the National Leadership Roundtable. Carrie is going to thank some people specifically in a second, but just to that last point, I think it's an very important point, and we agree with it wholeheartedly. To me, for us to accomplish, and it was one of the first statements I made yesterday, was the notion of cooperation. Identifying those best practices and those organizations who are trying to divine those, develop them, and part of our job is to uncover them and to get all of those people working together, not duplicating efforts that have already been out there, and there's obviously a lot of great work has been done on a lot of these different issues, and that's why I was trying to being careful to say that we should be picking and choosing the things that you may want us to do or the universities to do or the different organizations. Our part of our job is not only to identify what needs to be done and how to do it, but who to do it, and we want to make sure that we identify partners who have that kind of inclusive kind of capability, but are results-oriented, driving, creative, imaginative, and have a can-do approach to life. And again, when we set out on this whole process, our notion was to bring the thought leadership of the educational community together, try to identify these issues, and to come up with a business plan and an action plan. And over the next month or so, that's what we're going to be doing. We will take it upon ourselves to figure out what those things are that we can handle, but also when we come back to you, we're going to have suggestions on the different groups that we should partner with in order to execute, because none of us want to spend another time at another meeting where all we do is talk and we come up with some report and it sits on a shelf someplace. That is not what we are all about, and I don't think that's what you're all about. So thank you very much.
So Michelle, Tom, and Jeff, thank you. Terrific synopsis. My first official expression of gratitude is to all of you. We are humbled by your intelligence, insight, and creativity, and I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your schedules to be here with us over these 2 days. I also want to thank our sponsors. We have 2 corporate sponsors, Faith Direct, represented by founder Brian Walsh, and Changing Our World, Inc., represented by CEO Brian Crimmins and Senior Managing Director Gavin Mooney. Thank you for your support. I thank members of the board and planning committee, all of our speakers, facilitators, respondents, honorees, and scribes, those who led us in prayer and worshiped and helped plan the liturgy and mass program, President DeGioia, President of University Georgetown, for his hospitality, Susan Hernandez, our extraordinary event coordinator, and her team, Rob Lissack, our photographer, our tech people, and my extraordinary colleagues on staff, especially Michael Bruff, Mary Dorley, Peter Denio, General Jim Dubik, Kevin Watson, and in a very, very special way, Mike O'Loughlin, who is our full-time communications manager, but stepped up to the plate and is the principal organizer of everything that you experienced over these 2 days. So, Mike, great gratitude to you. We will be communicating with all of you. We will be sending the full set of recommendations. In fact, there was a total of 90 that came out of today's sessions, and we are going to be editing those, consolidating them, grouping them, refining them, and then sharing them with you for your comments. We will also be transcribing the plenary sessions into edited proceedings, so all of that great content will be captured and shared with you. And of course, we will be looking for next steps, action, assignments, responsibilities. In your program, your conference binder, in the back pocket, there is an evaluation sheet. If you fill it out now or send it in to us, we will probably send an electronic reminder. It's very helpful to us if you can give that feedback. What worked well? What did you find helpful? Everything from the accommodations to the content, our pre-planning materials, etc. And suggestions of future topics, future venues, we are open to all of your advice and counsel. If you have enjoyed or valued the experience over these last 2 days, please be an advocate of the Leadership Roundtable on Church Management with your local ordinary, with your colleagues in ministry, with anyone who will listen. And at the very least, be an advocate of the core goals, objectives, guiding principles, and charisms that I hope you have witnessed and experienced here. Some of these, and I hope this was evident, is that we love the church deeply. We truly love the church. When we see challenges in the church, we know that to do nothing is to be complicit, and that's born of love. We understand and greatly value the central insight in Archbishop Kurtz's homily. We intentionally look for and celebrate the talents and gifts and competencies in others. And when we find those, we want, in genuine Christian stewardship, to invite those competencies to serve the common good, to serve the church. We marvel at how much can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit. We value diverse perspectives, which was evident, strong integrated alliances and collaborations. We are all about maximizing capacity. As people of faith, we are confident in the future and we trust in providence. So thank you and bless you all for all that you do on behalf of others, especially for children, and in service to the church. Safe travels, and please note that we end it by 4 o'clock.